Yes.
Good morning. Dr. Evans, would you please call the roll?
Yes, I will. Dr. Blanton? Dr. Bullock?
Present.
Dr. Dempsey?
Present.
Dr. Fleming? Ms. Janeski? Dr. Graham? Dr. Houston?
Present.
Dr. Locklear?
Present.
Dr. Marr?
Present.
Dr. Miller?
Present.
Dr. Penfield?
Present.
Superintendent Truitt? Ms. Floyd?
Present.
Dr. Holland?
Present.
Dr. Weddington?
Here.
Dr. Wood? Mr. Smith?
Present.
Mr. Patton?
Present.
Thank you. We have quorum.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome commission members, advisors, staff, on-site visitors, and online listeners to the February 10th, 2022 monthly meeting of the North Carolina Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission. This commission develops and recommends to the State Board of Education rules related to all aspects of licensure and educator preparation programs. My name is Patrick Miller, and I'm the chairman of the Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission. I now call this meeting to order. Our agenda and materials are available online through the DPI website, www.ncpublicschools.org, on the SBE meetings link. The meeting is also audio streamed through a link located at the bottom of the eBoard agenda. I will now read the required ethics statement. Commission members are reminded that it is our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this commission. Does any member of the commission know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Commission members, you have had an opportunity to review the proposed agenda for today's meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda for the February 10th, 2022 meeting?
So moved, Sam.
Thank you, Sam. Do we have a second?
Second, Connie.
Thank you, Connie. We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda for today's meeting. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of approval, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
The motion carries. Thank you. The minutes from our previous commission meeting on January 13th, 2022 have been prepared and made available to you. Do I have a motion to approve these minutes?
I move to approve. This is Randy.
Thank you, Randy. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thanks, Sam. We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes from our meeting on January 13th, 2022. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of approval, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you very much. Now, Dr. Tom Tomberlin will present the NCDPI and State Board updates. Dr. Tomberlin.
Can't? Unmuted.
There we go. I'm sorry, folks, we're having a little technical difficulty here.
Okay, maybe you should turn your sound on, Tom, because I think I have my sound on.
I should turn my sound on.
Yes.
Hello? Thank you, Dr. Miller. I am Tom Tomberlin, Director of Educator Recruitment and Support at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. And I am bringing you updates from the most recent State Board of Education meeting, February 2022. So the first presentation that I want to cover is the local school administrative unit teacher compensation models and advanced teaching roles approvals. So this was for action with the board, and the first few slides here cover the purpose and the statutory requirements for the program, the Advanced Teaching Roles Program. I will leave it to board members to review those as necessary, but I want to go directly into the proposals and the approval. So we had 5 proposals. 4 of them met our threshold of meeting the 80%, of at least 80% on the score on the rubric. And that led us to selecting 4 of those, and their budget is listed on the next slide. So you can see here that they requested the total project budgets for these folks for their advanced teaching roles and the requested amount and their annual installments over the next 3 years. We worked with the board we had an additional $2 million in appropriations for this fiscal year, and those must be used by June 30th, 2022. So we recommended a funding model to the board that not only funded these 4 programs fully, but went back to some prior funded models that we had not fully funded and provided additional funding for them. So, and specifically that was the 2020 cohort with 6 districts who had been funded at about 80% or 85%. And so we proposed to use some of those funds to bring them up to their full requested funding. And in the next slide, so these were our 2 options for funding for the school year. The board has just selected option 1. You can see there. And then the next slide fully kind of articulates the distribution of funds from the $2.04 million that were appropriated by the legislature, some planning funds for the grantees, that reconciliation from the previous cohort. We're also allowing districts with previously approved plans to have some to renew their programs and receive funding, which would allow them to continue the program, some nominal funding for the state, which would allow them to exercise the class size flexibility, and then we have funds in for the initial contract for evaluation. And this is the funding for fiscal year 22-23, and for this one, the board also selected option 1 here. And that is an overview of that proposal. I do want to point out to board members the relevance of these programs and how they align with our vision of the teacher licensure and compensation reform work. Especially on those advanced roles and how those advanced roles can be practically used in districts. All of these proposals are listed on our website with the approved programs indicated. So board members that are interested in seeing how districts are operationalizing advanced roles currently could look there for some indications of how these things are how these advanced roles are being used. And I'm happy to take any questions if any board members have any.
Any questions? All right. Next update, 006 and 002.
Yes, so our next update is related to LICN 006.
Can you guys see that? Can you see that?
006?
For that 006?
Yeah, it's the.
Okay.
So LICN 006 is the policy related to experience credit. As you will recall, the Pepsi made a recommendation to the board to change the policy to allow a year of experience credit for all MSA interns who complete a 10-month internship. Just to refresh your memory, here's the recommended language that we brought to the State Board of Education. It's okay. There we go. So 1 full year of experience shall be awarded to MSA interns who meet the following criteria. They're enrolled in an approved EPP as a full-time MSA student, and they complete a 10-month internship in a public school unit and receive a state-funded stipend, or they complete a 10-month internship in a public school unit and receive a stipend from a non-state funded source. So either way, whether we wanted to provide the opportunities for potential grant funders or local administrative units to fund these internships if they so chose. If the intern completes that 10-month internship in a paid way, either by the state or some other entity, then they would be eligible for a year of experience. So as we presented to the board, subsequent to Pepsi approving this policy and our presentation to the board, a scenario occurred to us that became somewhat problematic. And let me go over those scenarios. So under this policy, we consider intern A completes a 10-month internship funded by the state. Of course, that person under the policy would get a year of experience. Intern B completes a 10-month internship funded by an LEA or grant. Again, policy covers this person, and they would be granted a year of experience. Intern C completes 4 months of paid internship and 6 months as a employed assistant principal. So this is a pretty common occurrence that the intern will leave the internship position and accept a full-time AP position with the LEA. When that occurs in this scenario, the employee would not qualify for a year of experience under this policy because they only did 4 months of the internship, but they would qualify for a year of experience under our employment policies, which mean if you work 6 months out of a 10-month academic year, you receive a year of experience credit. So they would qualify under our employment policy. However, if we look at intern D completes 5 months of paid internship and 5 months as employed as an AP. This person would meet neither the conditions of LICN 006 or the conditions of our employment policy, and therefore we could not grant that person a year of experience. We do not believe that this is the intent of the policy, and so we disclosed this situation to the State Board of Education, and their recommendation was to come back to them to address this issue with Pepsi and come back to them with a revised recommendation. And so that's why we're bringing it to your attention. So we believe that it's in the interest of everyone to create a condition under which these, a policy recommendation where one could use the combined time as an intern and the combined time as an employee to meet the year of experience credit. And I will pause right there for some discussion if anyone has comments on this.
Dr. Tomlin, I have a question. This is Craig Smith. Good morning, everybody. Curious if there was any consideration when we talk about the employment assistant principal, including potential dean of students, because I know a lot of PSUs, a lot of districts utilize those in dean of students roles similarly to those of assistant principals. I'm just curious if that has ever been under consideration.
So I think under this, the employment side, and so this is something we can consider. We can be agnostic about the AP side of this. If if a dean of students were considered as, if the person left the internship and was employed as a dean of students, certainly that would be employment that could generate a year of experience. So we could couch the language to say something like any combination of internship and full-time employment can meet the requirement for gaining a year of experience. We don't have to limit that to an AP. I think a different question, however, is whether, and this has come up recently, and this is why I'm bringing this up, whether functioning as a dean of students, employed as a dean of students, meets the requirements of a MSA internship. That is a question that the state cannot answer. That is under the purview of the EPP. So in the end, after the completion of the internship period or that year, whether it's a combination of internship or employment, the EPP has to recommend and basically assert that the internship period and or the employment period met the conditions of a 10-month internship. DPI is not in a position, nor is state board policy in a position to stipulate that a dean of students would meet that requirement. That is under the purview of our EPPs. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah. But we do have authority on the employment side. So we could frame the policy to allow for any employment. Now there's some question about if you did 5 months that this board needs to grapple with. If you did 5 months paid internship and then you abandoned that and let's say you went back to classroom teaching for 5 months, would that garner you a year of experience? And that's something that this board would need to consider and recommend.
Any further discussion or questions on this?
This is Connie. So, Tom, I'm assuming that you're looking for a motion for us to approve intern D. Is that the assumption?
So it's a great question. I think at this point we're getting your general feedback on this and your thoughts on how we should construct this. And I think the issue that Mr. Smith raised is an important one in this consideration. It would be helpful if we just had general thoughts on how you want staff to construct the policy recommendation that we can bring back to you for approval and get it back to the State Board of Education.
Well, this is Connie again. I just looking at intern C and looking at intern D. There's only difference in 1 month as it relates to paid internship and the time they service an AP. So I would say yes, that they need to receive the credit as 1 year of experience.
Great. And would you or other board members see any distinction between the actual role, the employment role that the person is playing? Does that need to be an AP as opposed to a dean, or is any kind of administrative role okay? And then if you decide to abandon the internship and go back to classroom teaching, would that still garner you a year of experience?
Tom, this is Wesley. I was just sitting here thinking we probably got this scenario going on all across North Carolina where folks are coded probably in payroll as a assistant principal. They have a AP/Dean of Students title or just a Dean of Students title. So I don't know that. I think it's going to be up to how people are coded. If they're coded as an AP, then they would qualify. I don't know if we need to get that elaborate with it or not.
Well, that would certainly help us from the financial side in ensuring that the credit is awarded. So if we see the appropriate, so they're coded one way as an AP, we know to look for that 10 months of that code. But then if we see the intern code in combination with the AP code, then certainly that would trigger a response to grant the year of experience. I don't know if we need to write it that way in the policy, but in practice, that's how we could approach it.
Could it be set up so that it could be the internship coded with any licensed position that normally would be eligible for retirement? And that way it covers all the teachers and everything that you...
So we could, so to clarify what Dr. Miller said, in case you folks didn't hear it, can we code it? Can we write the policy or the practice that supports the policy be the combination of any internship coding combined with any licensed staff coding would serve to trigger the year of experience? And we could certainly write it that way. And that helps me direct staff.
Idea suggested there.
I'm sorry?
That makes sense to me anyway, of what Patrick was mentioning there. That's kind of the train of thought I was going down.
So is that a motion?
This is Marcy, and I will make the motion that we move forward with the recommendation based on Dr. Miller's summary and Dr. Tomlin's summary, based on a combination of the AP intern code and any licensed position, otherwise that the combination of the two would then otherwise earn them experience credit. So that's how we do it with other types of positions. So it only makes sense to allow it for this now.
And this is Connie. I second that. I agree totally. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to try to restate the motion, and you all let me know if I captured it correctly. So we want to add an option to this policy that allows for the combination of internship and any licensed employment would equal a year of experience. Did I capture that correctly?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
All right, thank you. So we have a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any further discussion or comment?
I'll just say I like that idea. I think it treats everybody fairly, no matter if you're a dean of students, AP, or any other position you're doing an internship and working, for a public school. So that's a great suggestion.
I agree. Thank you. All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Great. The motion carries. Thank you very much. And Dr. Tomlin, you're back on deck. I think LICM 002.
Sure. So if I may, Chair Miller, I want to go back to Mr. Smith's comments.
Okay.
Not in policy, but in practice. So one of the concerns that we're trying to address is the concern that the internship, we don't want to incentivize folks leaving the internship to pursue employment. All the feedback that we've received from the field, both from the LEA side, the EPP side, and from principals themselves, is that the internship is a very valuable experience. But we don't feel that this policy would be the right kind of lever to try to incentivize that. So what we're proposing to do is in procedure, when an employee moves, when an intern moves from internship to employment, having a process that makes it clear to everyone that what the requirements of that person are. They're still under the requirements to meet the internship, even though they're employed, and to make it very clear to the employer that the EPP has to have confidence that the internship requirements are met regardless of the employment status. So we'll work that into procedure, and we're developing a form and a process for that. So I want everybody to understand that we're still addressing the idea that an internship is very important to these folks, but they should still have the opportunity for full-time employment while they're meeting those requirements of the internship. So we'll handle that in procedure, but that's not a policy consideration. Right? So the other update we have is on the graduate pay requirement. These two policies were packaged together in our presentation to the board. So this will be coming back. We have no changes here, but we just wanted to. This is still 006. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, even so, this will come back with the internship experience issue, revised internship year of experience policy, but this was also an amendment we made. There are no changes to this. This is exactly as you saw it when we presented it to you, and it will come back for approval in the following board meeting. LIC in 002, the pre-kindergarten teachers in non-public settings. My understanding was there was not a lot of discussion about this, and it will come back for action in March.
Limited license.
Oh, I do to tell you that we did have a presentation to the board on limited licenses that was put off until next month. We will, once that's presented to the board, we will bring that back. But you might have seen that on the agenda. You might have even seen some of the data displays in the presentation. If you did and you have any questions, I'm happy to answer any of those questions you might have.
Any questions? Hearing none, we'll call on Dr. Seiberg to give some updates on licensure requirements for school administrators.
Good morning, everyone. So we went to the board with some additional information regarding the school administration things that we've discovered a couple of months back. I'm going to give you just a quick review of that. Many of you are aware of most of what's going on, but I just want to touch on a couple things. And then what I'd like to do is tee up the work that's been led by Dr. Penfield on some of this as well for some discussion. Just as a quick reminder, what we're talking about is 115C-284. And in there, last spring, Tom and I discovered that we had there were some things in that law that we were not in compliance with across the state. These are the various items. In particular, under Section B1, there is no test that's currently in place, but that is a test is required in Section B1. It's not been in place for some time. In C2, there is a requirement to complete a year-long internship, although we've never really defined a year-long internship. And this group will have to manage navigating a definition of both a full-time internship and a part-time internship. And then in Section D1, there's a couple of components here that were a little squishy for the state. One is that all folks that are attempting to head down the principal pathway, they have to have a second level of differentiation in their licensing. We view that as a CPL. They have to have at least 4 years of classroom teaching experience, and then they must at least possess a master's degree specifically in education administration. So again, these are all things that are currently in 115C-284. On the next slide, we do, and again, this was an update that we've provided in the past, so I'm going to go over it real quickly. There was, when we drew the attention of this problem, our liaisons went over to the lawmakers, and the lawmakers passed 2021-170 last fall. And that resolved issues that we've identified in law that have occurred over the past decade. So in other words, if I was a principal and I never took a test in 2014, this law allowed me to continue to operate and not have my license removed because somehow I was out of compliance over the past decade. So that law dealt with anything in the past. It also dealt with anything in the present, insofar as it allows anybody who has started a program and has completed at least one course by the end of August of this year, they are allowed to complete the program as it's existing as it's designed. So in other words, those folks that are caught in the middle of the pipeline wouldn't necessarily be somehow have to shift gears and navigate some things that were through no fault of their own in however they got where they're at in the process. What this law did not do is that it did not anticipate what happens in the future. So it handled the past, it handled the present, it did not address the future. And so what that means is, as of September 1 of 2022, all those things that I mentioned that were a challenge for the field in 115C-284, they are in play again as of September 1 of 2022. And that, when we look at the current pipeline, particularly those that enter the field, enter the pathway with a master's degree, but not specifically a master's degree in principal administration, like an MSA specific program, those folks represent almost a third of the candidate population. So going forward, as of September 1, about a third of the principal pipeline would be affected based on current data that we have. So this is obviously a challenge, and so the board asked me and Kim and our team here to go and collect data from the field, which is why we were presenting in this month's board meeting. So we collected data on this issue from stakeholders representing three groups: the Teacher Recruitment Retention Task Force, the Principal Advisory Group, that's led by Tabari Wallace, and the North Carolina Association of Colleges for Teacher Education. That's the organizational body that supports all the ed prep programs, both public and private, across the state. So those three groups were asked essentially the same questions. And what I tried to do with the board this month was to frame, ultimately the board is going to have to weigh in on what it would like to see in terms of a formal recommendation that goes to the lawmakers to adjust 115C-284. And I want to be clear here, and I was clear with the board too, the board is not making a policy decision here. This has to be changed in law. So what they're grappling with is, what is the best recommendation to go to the lawmakers to make this adjustment? So that's why they're asking for all this feedback. So specifically, under the licensure exam, does the State Board of Education believe that a licensure exam is required? And if not, how else is that going to be addressed within the preparation process? Under year-long internship, we know in legislation it requires a 10-month internship, but we need to get some clarity from the board ultimately as to should the policy allow for an equivalent internship defined by hours as opposed to a 10-month contract? So can we convert that to the hours? And should the requirement for part-time be the same as full-time folks that are in those programs? On the next slide, you'll see some additional questions the board is grappling with. The top one here is the teaching experience. Should the requirements for principal licensure include a minimum number of years of actual teaching experience? So not I'm in a school. In other words, those folks that might be a social worker, a guidance counselor, a school psychiatrist, those are folks that are not actually in the classroom and engaged in the teaching process. They're in a school setting. Are those folks allowed to enter the profession and head down this pathway, or are they going to have to go back if they wanted to become a principal to get teaching experience, which is the way it's currently laid out? And then lastly, should it be specifically an MSA requirement, or can folks operate as they have been for the past couple of years under this assumption that as long as you have a master's degree, it's the responsibility of the educator preparation program to adequately prepare those folks to be effective in the principal position? Or is it in fact, should it always be a master's specifically in school administration? So those are the areas that the board has to ultimately come up with some decisions. We ask the various stakeholders these same questions, and here's a synopsis of the Teacher Recruitment and Retention and Task Force. They are unanimously agreeing that that a year-long internship should be in place. Regarding the part-time program candidates, they were in favor of considering or experimenting, experimenting with the idea of perhaps holding a provisional license to serve as an assistant principal for a year, and then upon completion of that, whatever criteria would be held onto that, that may be a bridge to move them from an AP to a principal position in terms of the licensing. For full-time program candidates, they were in favor of a paid full-time internship post-coursework. And regarding out-of-state principals, their recommendation was to have at least 1 year of experience as a principal or assistant principal, or have at least completed an internship in another state in order to qualify for getting a North Carolina license here. Regarding the licensure exam, they were unanimous in agreement that no licensure exam should be in place, and they were they preferred the idea of performance-based evidence as opposed to the exam itself. Regarding the teaching experience, they were in favor of 4 years of teaching of experience in a school. So they're basically saying that school social workers, school guidance counselors, and school psychiatrists should be allowed to head down the principal pathway. They did feel that 4 years of experience in the school setting and maintaining some sort of a continuing professional license should be the qualifier for that. And then the out-of-state teachers who hold a 4-year license, the idea here is that if you had 4 years, that will allow you to head down the pathway of attempting to get the principal license, will allow you to play ball to start a principal prep program here. And then regarding the Masters of School Administration, can you go back one? Regarding the Masters of School Administration, they were unanimously in agreement that they were in favor of having either the Masters in School Administration or some level of master's degree along with completing the licensure program to have both in place going forward. So that's the first group. The second group was the Principal Advisory Group. Regarding the year-long internship, they were in favor of keeping the 10-month internship, but they also suggested to allow some flexibility within that 10 months, that it didn't necessarily have to coincide with the beginning and the end of a school year, but to have some flexibility there. They were in favor of adding the hour equivalency of the year-long internship to equate to 1,000 hours, which is essentially thinking of that internship as 6 hours a day for 185 days. As an alternative to just saying year-long internship. Regarding part-time MSA interns, they were in favor of those folks to complete the hour equivalent. So in other words, the 1,000-hour equivalent would be the same for the part-time folks. It may take them longer, but the point at which they finish their 1,000 hours, if it took them a year and a half, if it took them 2 years, so be it, but that the equivalency would be the same as the full-time folks. They were in favor of internship pay under the principal mentor requirement. They wanted to focus on the idea that the principal mentor needed to be defined as effective within the school site. And in other words, that you're pairing somebody with a qualified, highly successful candidate, and to be focused on that regarding the mentor placement. And then the last thing that they were in favor of was this idea of, can the internship capture multiple grade levels. So in other words, if my internship was always in an elementary setting for the entire year, it may not adequately prepare me for middle school or high school experience, which ultimately, when I take my job at the local school district, I may end up being in one of those areas. So they were in favor of trying to adjust the experience to account for grade levels to better prepare principals forward. On the next slide, we'll see regarding the licensure exam, they did not support having a licensure exam in place. They preferred the portfolio system that's currently in place. On the next slide, you'll see regarding the teaching experience, they had the same opinion as the previous task force that I mentioned, but they were in favor of limiting it to 3 years of experience, not just not 4 years, but they were also in favor of school social workers and guidance counselors being allowed to function in that pathway as well. And regarding the MSA, they were in favor of broadening the MSA, which, as it's currently laid out, to accommodate any master's degree, as long as that they're adequately prepared through a licensure-only program. Then the third group you'll see is the INTACTI group. That's a group of basically stakeholders from across all the EPPs within the state. We talked with leadership over there, and they were able to zap a survey to all the educator preparation programs that had approved principal preparation programs in place. And they heard from 20 out of 23 of them. And long story short, that group is not in favor of a licensure exam. They're in favor of at least a minimum of 2 semesters or a minimum of 300 to 500 hours for the year-long internship. They were in favor and in support of both teachers and support service personnel, i.e. the guidance counselors and psychiatrists who allow to pursue the principal license. And the school administration, masters in school administration, they were in favor of allowing both the master's program and the add-on programs that lead to principal licensure. So that's a summary that the board wanted to hear. And the next steps were for, as was mentioned in a prior meeting here with Pepsi, was to convene a subcommittee, and that subcommittee is chaired by Dr. Penfield, to essentially look at the information that was collected across these 3 groups. And essentially you can think of that as the temperature of these issues across the state. And ultimately, the request is that that Pepsi present this recommendation to you all, or that you all make a decision on what your recommendation is, your formal recommendation that goes to the state board. Just as a quick reminder, this is not following our traditional pathway here, because this is not leading to a policy change. This is the board asking Pepsi to weigh in on what it thinks is in the best interest of the field for principal preparation, so that they can ultimately make a well-informed recommendation to the lawmakers for changing potentially some, if not all, aspects of 284 in law. So that's the summary. And then I think we're going to hand that over to Dr. Penfield, because we had some work behind the scenes over the past month with his subcommittee. And Dr. Penfield, could you share some of the developments that have occurred in that work behind the scenes?
Yeah, I certainly can. Andrew, thanks so much for teeing that up. That was really useful. And Kim, I think, is going to share this document. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to recognize the other members of the subcommittee, Dr. Houston, Dr. Holland, Dr. Dempsey, contributed greatly to this. So what we've done here is really just take the information that Andrew just presented, and we've reorganized it according to the 4 major buckets of issues that are at play. And then organize it across the 3 stakeholder groups and what their input is. So the first one is the licensure exam. Should there be a licensure exam? And if not, then what should the process look like? And so what you're seeing on your screen is a summary of what Andrew's just presented for each of the three groups that provided input. And as a subcommittee, we examined that information. And based on that information, you'll see in the lower box there, the Pepsi draft recommendation, where we landed as a subcommittee was to discontinue the licensure exam requirement. And then in lieu of the exam requirement, have a performance-based assessment in a school setting. And this could be part of, would be part of the broader portfolio that could be done. And that performance-based assessment becomes important because that would be based on the articulated standards related to the licensure. So that was the first one. And Kim, I wonder if you can just scroll down a little bit. There we go. The second area under examination had to do with the MSA. Should it be required that there be an MSA? And after examining the input from the stakeholder groups, the subcommittee landed on a draft recommendation that we should require a master's in school administration degree or a master's in another field. And should the master's be in another field, that we require an add-on licensure program to accompany that master's in the other field. And I wonder if we can, go down to the next one. Right. Then pertaining to the issue of the year-long internship, based on the stakeholder info that was provided, the Pepsi subcommittee draft recommendation does asserts the requirement for a year-long internship. And where the subcommittee ended up was providing latitude for there to be a range of time from 300 to 500 hours up to 1,000 hours. And then this would, provide the latitude for part-time versus full-time. And the duration, regardless of the duration, the same standards would have to be met, and that would tie back to the standards used in the performance-based assessment. And so to some degree, the issue of timeline, as the subcommittee discussed it, whatever the timeline is, the important thing is that that year-long internship must meet those criteria set forth by the desired standards. And the last issue, thanks, Kim, is teaching experience. And where the subcommittee landed was for there to be a requirement of 4 years of experience within a licensure area for certified personnel in a school setting. So that does not mean that it necessarily needs to be in as a classroom teacher. This would be broader and would include other support service personnel such as counselors and social workers. Chairman Miller, I welcome any comments or questions.
Any comments or feedback?
Yes. Nice mistake. All right. I have to turn on the line. Awesome. You mute. All right. All right. Thank you, Dr. Penfield. That was very helpful. So I'm taking off my hat as Pepsi support and putting back on my hat as overseeing licensure. So I have a couple questions, clarifying questions. If we could go back to the top recommendation. So when we say a performance-based assessment in a school setting, so I really like that. Is that the basis of, is that kind of in lieu of the a standardized principal licensure exam, like a praxis, or is it the performance-based, or is it the portfolio that would be submitted as evidence? Like, which one of these is substituting for the praxis?
Thanks, Tom. The way the subcommittee discussed it is that it would be the performance-based assessment that would be the substitute for what would have been the more, standardized written exam. And that performance-based assessment could be a portion of the broader portfolio. I welcome input from any of the other subcommittee members if they have additional insight into that. Does that address your question?
Well, I think in a way it does. So just to make sure I have this clear in my head, we would have some kind of, because this is for the purpose of licensure, that performance-based assessment would need to be standardized across all programs. And so that's the piece that's standardized. The portfolio could be specific to the EPP, and that would be something that the EPP would judge as meeting the requirements for program completion, which is separate and apart from the requirement that we have for demonstrating competency to hold the license, which I'm interpreting from this presentation would be that performance-based assessment. Am I understanding the distinction correctly?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, that's it.
Right. And then on the next bullet, so some of the feedback that we observed is from the licensure only programs is that it was often these licensure only programs were achieved by truncation of the content delivery. That is, they didn't cover, this is from feedback from the EPPs themselves that, these licensure only programs were making decisions about certain standards that were being left off. Does PEPC see the need here to stipulate that a licensure only program may not carry as many credit hours, but would still cover the full scope of requirements for principal preparation?
Yeah, Tom, we discussed this in the subcommittee meeting, and where we landed is that at the end of the day, regardless of which path you're taking, you're still accountable to the same standards, upon which the performance assessment is going to be based, et cetera. So in some form or fashion, those standards must be met, whether you're going through an add-on process or the full degree program. Now, that may show up differently across different paths.
Right. I agree with that, but the expectation would be that whether your course name captures the standard, the content of those courses would be flexible enough to cover all the standards. Is it? Yeah. Are we saying the same thing there?
Well, so maybe. I think that there are areas where perhaps certain standards are met in an add-on licensure path, but perhaps not within a structured, organized course, right? So it could be the situation where a particular standard is met through the internship process, for example.
Okay.
So we weren't being prescriptive as a subcommittee with respect to that, in terms of where it needs to show up in the program.
All right, that's helpful. And then the year-long internship. So just from a position, we don't have any precedent in state board licensing policy where the requirements are different based on one's orientation to preparation. And just kind of as DPI staff, I would ask Pepsi to really consider, this is quite a broad range, and we really try to ensure that the policy is the same for all applicants, and that we don't have some kind of differentiated path based on preparation, your orientation to the preparation. So I just want to raise that as a note. I'm not trying to insert, but it will cause problems in implementation if the range is that wide. And then last on the teaching experience, never mind. I don't have any questions on that one. I think that one's that's very clear.
Hey, Tom, this is Van. Can I go back to your last question?
Yes.
The range of time is what you're raising solved by having a range of time no less than 500 hours. And then if a particular program, MSA or licensure, only wants to make that 1,000, that's a program decision, but it cannot be less than a certain amount.
If you couch it as a less than, I think that no less than, I think that solves the problem. That means there's a minimal standard. I think that, well, one, I think you've got a default minimum of 300, which causes me some concern. And then 300 to 500 up to 1,000 hours. So then you're limiting the number of hours, where a full-time MSA program in our terms would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500 hours. So a 10-month full-time internship program, as we're supporting with state funding, would put you somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500 to 1,600 hours. So I'm concerned about having a max of 1,000 hours there. And then the other side of this is just from a kind of a, for lack of a better term, a marketing position. What I strongly heard from our groups, our feedback groups, was that it is the internship that matters. And then having that position coupled with you could do really what it was equivalent to about 3 months of an internship. That's a hard sell for me. And I'm just pushing folks to think about that dual message of the internship is where good principals become great principals. But you could do as little as 300 hours, or you could do up to 1,600 hours. There's not a lot of difference there.
Hey, Randy, can I have one more point?
Yeah, please.
And Tom, I think you're touching on some really important things we talked about in the work group, that the minimum, I agree that a 300, maybe even 500 hour could present some problems. But part of what I think, Randy, that we talked about in the group that was critical was that second bullet, the duration and components appropriate to the desired performance outcomes for the year-long internship. So we talked about things like the opening of school, transitioning out of school at the end of the year. There are the cycle of the school year responsibilities an administrator has, and that those things had to be captured in the competencies, which meant that alone causes the internship to spread out over the calendar. And then the question, Tom, that I think you've raised that's important is, and then what is the minimum number of hours in that cycle that you need to perform in the role? Randy, I think I captured what we...
Yeah, that was it, Van. I just want to echo something you said, that as the subcommittee, we spent a lot of time talking about it more, not from a standpoint of the specific amount of time, but going back to the foundations of, what are the competencies or the standards of practice that one has to have, and to have that be the driver of this. Of course, acknowledging that you're going to have some amount of time in an internship to, develop those competencies or attain those standards. So Van, I think I've just reorganized the way you've articulated it, but that's where we had that broad range, Tom, in terms of the amount of time that was positioned there. And I suspect we can go back and revisit that.
Well, I really appreciate it that you and Dr. Dempsey both are talking about this in terms of competency. And I am in full agreement that when this is about, when this is about competency, the hours seem to matter less. And I look forward to revisiting this when we think about the principal licensure and compensation redesign work that's going to closely follow on the heels of the current work we're doing. So this has been great, and I really appreciate your thoughts on that. I just need to be very clear about how to articulate that within the agency as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Are there other comments from the commission members? So do we need to tighten up, Dr. Penfield, that piece around the recommendation for the internship hours on the recommendation, or are we leaving it as is, knowing that the state board can do whatever they want to do with it?
Chairman Miller, I'm in favor of tightening it up, and I'm wondering what process we need to use to do that.
I think we can do it by just accepting feedback from members of the commission before we vote on the final recommendation. I was thinking, based on the comments that I heard from you and Dr. Dempsey a moment ago, that in my mind, I was thinking a counselor, school counselor who has a master's degree, who would complete an internship maybe a half hour or an hour before school and an hour or two after school over the course of a year on a 215-day, 10-month, like a teacher contact track at 2.5 hours a day is about 537 or 38 hours, plus maybe a little bit of summer. So maybe we could just say no less than 500 hours. And then you don't really have to say anything else. But that's just a suggestion to toss out to get the conversation started for the commission.
I'm certainly in support of that.
Randy, if you want to hear from the subcommittee members, I support that language.
The other option, Dr. Penfield, is that we still got plenty of time here. Is that the subcommittee could meet again between now and the March meeting and discuss that again and bring it back to PEPC in March. That's another suggestion, but that's up to the will of the commission.
Chairman Miller, can I ask, can we just inquire from the commissioners whether anyone is opposed to making this modification?
You absolutely may.
Yeah. So is anyone opposed to this change? Chairman Miller, hearing no one in opposition, I recommend that we make this one change in the recommendations, and I believe that was the only change that we had raised.
All right.
And then outside of that, I think we're good.
Subcommittee members in favor of making that change?
So just to clarify, Dr. Penfield, on the question of the performance-based assessment, you're just helping me understand what the intent of the language is. We're not seeing that as any kind of need to articulate that the performance-based assessment is the thing that stands in place of a praxis and not the portfolio. And as long as I'm clear on that, I'm not saying you need to change the language, but I want to make sure that I'm clear on what's being articulated here.
Yeah, Tom, exactly. And that's that second bullet point. In lieu of the exam requirements, have a performance-based assessment in a school setting. Yep.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Dempsey, Dr. Holland, Dr. Houston, are the three of you okay with changing the subcommittee's recommendation to no less than 500 hours?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So it seems that we have agreement. I would now entertain a motion from a commission member to approve these recommendations to be sent to the state board for discussion in March of 2022.
Connie, so moved.
Thank you, Connie. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second, Michael.
Thank you, Michael. Have a motion and a second to approve the principal licensure recommendations that you've heard and to have them sent to the state board for discussion in March. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Dr. Penfield, and the subcommittee members for your work on this. All right, next, Dr. Evans will discuss a policy amendment to LICN 001 that focuses on updates to endorsements and lifetime license policies.
Good morning, everyone. This is a policy amendment to LICN 001, and it revises the list of endorsements at the top of the policy. I just want to remind everyone what an endorsement is, that it's attached to a full license area. So there's a base license and then it's attached, and that person, that teacher is able to teach that specific subject at a half-time or less basis. And so I want to bring you back to the top of the policy to let you see how in partnership with Licensure, we have gone through and provided, first letting everyone know what the double plus sign means, that it means endorsement, and that you can refer back to section 1.40, which I just looked at, and then eliminating any of the endorsements that no longer exist. And so you'll see that Italian and Chinese, that these two endorsements, that they are now full licensure areas. And so someone that holds that license now is able to teach that at 100% of their time instead of 50% or less. And then you'll see that the career and technical education endorsements no longer exist, and instead those have been revised with the full licensure areas instead. So you'll see that throughout the top of LICN 001. And then as we go into 1.40, which I had just left, before I pass by, there are a few edits throughout to give a correct section number, because this policy has been renumbered and that caused confusion to the field as far as where they should reference within the policy to be able to understand the policy fully. So that happens throughout the policy. And then going into 1.40, you'll see that CTE has been eliminated from the endorsement list. So you'll see that there. And then 1.50, that's another section elimination that no longer exists within the policy, since lateral entry licenses are coming to a close. And then lastly, for this policy, there was a legislative revised update to the lifetime license. And now the lifetime license is available for professional educators. So that would include teachers, administrators, or student services personnel that serve 30 years or more, a combined total of 30 years or more in one or more public school units in North Carolina. So you can either be issued a lifetime license from number 2 or number 1 completed 30 or more years of credible service with the teachers and state employees retirement system. So that had existed before. So now this includes public school units and not just LEAs. So that includes charter schools as well and laboratory schools. And this license still remains to not need renewal, but someone has to be currently licensed as a professional educator in North Carolina.
I'll just use yours. Okay.
Yes.
Can everyone hear me okay? So I just want to clarify a couple of things that came up. They must be a current license holder. So that's not to say that somebody who's been retired and let their license lapse can't ever qualify for a limited lifetime license. What they would need to do is first renew the license. And they would follow the retired license renewal process, and then they could then subsequently switch that over to a lifetime license. But the statute is clear that you have to hold an active license. And one other thing that I want to raise for our LEA folks or for our K-12 or PSU folks is that the change here is that it's either or on the 30. You can hold the license for 30 years and teach in public schools in North Carolina, or you have the service credit in teasers. So let's say, for instance, I worked in state government for 10 years, and then I moved into the teaching profession for the next 20 years. You would meet the qualification not because you held the license for 30 years, but you have service credit in teasers for 30 years. But the other way around wouldn't work for you unless you actively held the license for the entire time you were in state government. The other question is, what about if I hold the license for 29 years and I'm retiring because I have a year of sick leave? What would need to happen is teasers would need to credit your service credit in their system prior to you applying for the the lifetime license. So just want to be clear about kind of how this is going to have to play out functionally with all the LEA folks. But this is, by and large, this is a great update to the system because now our administrators and our instructional support are covered, and we're and it removes some of the loopholes that were affecting a lot of our folks who had served many, many years in public education. So just wanted to make that clarifying point.
Dr. Tomlin?
Yes.
Really quickly, thanks for the clarification on the current definition. It doesn't mean that they hold an expired license, but that they actually have an active license. Does that mean active in terms of having a established renewal cycle? Or is a validated license considered active?
Yes, a validated license would be considered active.
Okay. All right. So that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
Are there other questions? Hearing none, I would ask for a motion to approve this policy amendment to LICN 001 that updates the lifetime license and licensure endorsements so that it can be sent to the state board for discussion in March.
So moved.
Thanks. Was that Dr. Houston?
Dempsey.
Dempsey, okay. Sorry, Dan.
No problem.
Who was the second?
Dr. Holland.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second to approve the policy amendment to LICN 001. Any further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of approval, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Dr. Evans. And our last item on the agenda for today, Dr. Tomberlin will bring for discussion only policy TCED 004, which is the EPP approval process.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Miller. So this is just an update for you on the development of this policy recommendation for the EPP program approval process. After some internal conversation, of course, we brought you a recommendation that program approval would be based on a national accrediting body's initial authorization of the EPP. So this is not a full kind of accreditation, but it's generally the document review that the accrediting body does in advance of the full accreditation process. So the update we have for you, if we've reached out to both the national accrediting bodies, that is CAPE and AQEP, and we are having ongoing conversations with CAPE about what the cost of this approval process would be, and we don't have a hard number yet, but that should be forthcoming. But we do want to advise you that we did get an estimate of the cost from AQEP, and that cost is $10,000. And so we want to be sure that PEPC members understand that there's some practical considerations that need to be considered in this recommendation, and we're happy to have you discuss the continued policy recommendation in light of this new information.
Any comments or questions?
Tom, can you say the first half of that again? The money covers what? What's being paid for?
So for program approval, our process for program approval where there's not full accreditation would be for the EPP, the applicant, to submit to initial authorization from the nationally normed accrediting body, either AQEP or CAPE, and that would serve as the peer review process in making our recommendation to the State Board of Education for initial authorization of the EPP.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions or comments?
So would it be fair to interpret the lack of question or comment to say that the policy recommendation will go forward pending any additional information from CAPE? And I would assume that if CAPE is less than or equal to the $10,000, Pepsi would not need to review this again. But if it's greater than $10,000, we would want to advise the commission members of that.
Well,
Tom,
the agenda is discussion only for today, so it'll be coming back regardless.
That's true.
Tom, I just from the point of an EPP, that is not a wild number. I think it's actually less than the last check we sent to CAPE. So
I would say it's, from a district standpoint, though, it's on the steep side. Other comments, concerns, questions?
Dr. Dr. Miller, I'm sorry to report that I did not have sticker shock when Dr. Tomlin quoted that number.
That's quite all right. All right, well, thank you, commission members, advisors, and staff for your preparation for today's discussions. I would remind commission members that our next monthly meeting is scheduled for Thursday, March the 10th, beginning at 9:00 a.m. We've now completed our meeting, and unless there's additional business, I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Connie.
Thanks, Connie. We have a second?
Second.
Thank you. A motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor of adjournment, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. We're adjourned.